Welcome back to the Director's Playbook. I'm your host, Paul Lovelace. Last time, Dr. Alan Wolfelt revealed why funerals are important and why we are the gatekeepers of ceremony. Today, our desire is to share some advice on how to take next steps, the how, if you will, some practical ideas to help make ceremonies even more meaningful in a rapidly changing world. So, Alan, welcome back. Good to see you.
Thank you. Glad to be with you. Thanks for hosting me today. I appreciate it.
We had so much great content on the first session. We wanted to, take a pause and maybe get more practical and tactical for the audience who might want to figure out just how, now that I know all this important information, what do I do with it? Does that sound like a good plan to you?
That works for me, Paul. Certainly does. Absolutely.
Fantastic. Well, you mentioned the integrative phase of change a little bit, that funeral service might be in the integrative phase. Would you be able to explain a little bit of what that means and how this can, as we improve our body of knowledge, what this means for us?
Yeah, I think, again, to seek an understanding that there were three phases of the evolution of funeral service. There was a formative phase, a normative phase, and we're now faced with what we'd call the integrative phase. So when we look at the formative phase, we know that in the late 1800s, early 1900s, that many of your listeners, if they've had the opportunity to study the evolution of funeral service, know that it evolved out of the furniture industry, and that by day you'd have a furniture store, and then by night or evening you might hold a visitation and a funeral the next day. And that was the formative phase, where we began to see the evolution of a formalization of funeral service, if you will. And then we evolved in the normative phase, and that was the time when families may not have been able to necessarily articulate why we had funerals, but they knew there was value in them. And so they held them, and boy, the good times rolled, and right up until the late 70s and early 80s, people didn't come in so defensive. But now we've evolved, Paul, into, as you know, the integrative phase, where they've changed, funeral service has changed, and the question becomes, can we adapt and be more strategic in our response to families saying, I'm not so sure I want that traditional funeral, which then leads us to know we have to, at times, yes, honor tradition, not get ahead of the customer who values that, but also do what I would call incorporate innovation, to tying the functions of ceremony to creative ways that we can dose why we've had ceremonies, but know it's, if we're holding on to the past and want everything to be the way it was in the normative phase, that they'll leave us behind in funeral service. So that's a brief explanation of formative, normative, integrative, and why now we have to step into some new challenges and be educators with families.
So it sounds like you're describing a paradigm shift. Does that sound correct?
Well, in part, you have to be more of an educator than you did historically. People would come in and they didn't question value. Oh, we'll just do that. And we'd have, visitation and a ceremony and ride in the procession and go to a committal and have a gathering. And we didn't find that they were defensive about those. They carried them out even though they couldn't articulate the functions of them.
Yeah.
But now, for some of the converging influences we talked about in our part one conversation, shift in the mortality rate, loss of understanding of the role of hurt in healing, loss of death symbols, and efficiency-based culture that confuses what's easy with what's more effective. Those things have converged where now we shouldn't be shocked that families are coming in this integrative phase and saying, wait a minute, I'm not so sure I value what I valued back in the normative phase. So then that we have to step into that, recognize that, and say, oh, every step of this service cycle, what a privilege that because I like to teach, I'm going to have the opportunity to not get defensive, but to use high-level interpersonal skills combined with body of knowledge to teach why do we have funerals, and then use a three-phase model to do so. Information, education, and then honor the choices that families then make.
Yeah, it might be a good place to start. I'm thinking about if I owned a funeral home. Now, I may or may not have a mission statement. Hopefully I would. But if I did have one, maybe it's not very good. But when I'm hearing you talk, I'm thinking about I need to let the world know and myself know what I stand for, what we stand for, what we believe in our business. And so how would you feel about that as a good course of action for a funeral professional?
Well, that's an excellent place to start, because without vision or mission, you'll get lost. Yeah. And so to say I'm in the caregiving business, and don't shy away from the fact you combine your caregiving with having to have a business that's profitable. Don't hesitate don't back away from that reality. But to say I'm in the funeral service, not industry. I hate that term that gets
I don't
used.
like it either.
Yeah, we're in funeral service to help people create meaningful funeral experiences. And then out of that comes, what do I need to do for myself, my staff, to make sure that we're doing quality control to meet that objective? Well, I've got to understand, why do we have ceremony? I got to be able to articulate reality, recall, support, expression, meaning. If I can do that and combine getting those dosed during the ceremony with use of elements, visitation, music, symbols, action, that's how we know we create that beautiful sweet spot where families say, now that was a really great funeral.
So what is your best advice to someone? Let's assume they've addressed their mission statement, they've got that improved or got established, and now they want to work on that body of knowledge. They want to improve their vocabulary, their vernacular. They want to be able to spout off some of the terms that you mentioned just now. Where do they start? What do they do? How can they get better?
They first ask themselves if they understand the value of training and education, is the way I would say it. Because there are some people who are closed learners and there are others who are open learners. And that's all going to start from the top. There are people in leadership positions that understand the importance, the critical importance of saying, let's not assume knowledge from our staff. Let's start with a beginner's mind and heart and say, let's take, first of all, and study why have we had funerals since the beginning of time, and how can we articulate that. And then let's take every element of ceremony and let's make sure we study our body of knowledge about the function of a visitation. Why do we use music? What is the function of symbols? Why do we use action? That's what we need to dedicate ourselves toward, but not assume that because I've been in funeral service for 10 years or 20 years or 30 years that I know all that. So first, do we have people who are open-hearted and open-minded about saying, can I continue to grow and learn and commit myself to knowing we have a very changed customer out there who has had a death in their life, who's going to need me to step into that role of educator? And then can I dedicate myself to studying that body of knowledge?
So next, it might make sense. I mean, we all have habits, right? Some of our habits are really good, like hopefully we brush our teeth every morning when we get out of bed and comb our hair. Wait, I don't comb my hair, but I have habits that are good and habits are not so good. So as a funeral professional, we also have habits. So there might be an opportunity to take a look at our habits. What advice would you share in that regard?
Well, to not assume that you already know what's good for a family is a way to make sure you do your habit check, if you will. And by that I mean staying open and learning every step of the service cycle about what the family's teaching you their desires are, but also not hesitating to make sure you aren't in the habit of thinking you already know what a family needs more than they do. That's one of the biggest habits I'll witness at times if I was supportively confrontive, is I know more than this family about what their needs are. No, listen, listen, listen. Learn the 10 subcomponents of deep listening. Learn all the interpersonal skills you need so that you don't get into a defensive posture with a family. And check your habits. What habits do you have that are serving you well? What habits do you have that have been passed down transgenerationally that may not be serving you well? And by that I mean sometimes we learn work tapes that we gotta be there for every family. But if you have a number of families you're serving and you think you're the only one that can do the arrangement conference and you're not training new people and open to new ways of doing things, then you eventually run the risk of putting yourself out of business by not creating new people who have body of knowledge to help families that we're honored to serve.
Well, one of the habits I was thinking about are the questions that we ask. I know in sales, the one who asks the best questions has the best influence on the direction that conversation goes, right? So as a funeral professional, the questions that we ask can certainly have a similar impact. So you might say, can I give you my best advice on that? Do you mind if I share a story with you? Things along those lines. So what would your advice be to the questions that funeral professionals would ask of families?
Well, you start in the foundation of learning. You're going to learn more from a family by learning the distinction between open-ended question versus closed. For example, do you want to have a visitation or not? Do you want to have some music or not? Do you want to go to the grave or not? I will still witness at times people asking a series of closed-ended questions that don't allow you to learn from the family about your opportunities to educate them. So do you have any thoughts related to the possibility that even though your mom was 93 years old, because maybe they've already given you a hint, we'll commonly see people say, well, a lot of mom's friends have died. Well, I'm not sure we need a visitation. Oh, what a teachable moment now to know that even though somebody has died in their 90s, the people that show up at visitation may have never even met the person, but they're there to support you. So knowing in your body of knowledge to say, well, you're not alone. I always say join people before you move. You're not alone with the thought that because your mom was in her 90s that some of her friends and family have died. Would it be okay if we talked about why we've learned from families that at times, even when somebody is in their 90s and dies, it's important to consider receiving friends prior to a ceremony? And 99% of the time, if you ask gently and appropriately, they're not going to say, no, I don't want you to teach me. They're going to say, oh, okay. And then you go on to teach them that even though your mom was 93 years old, and a lot of her friends have died, we've discovered over the years that you'll always remember the people who come to that visitation, and you'll be so thankful. So don't think that everybody who might come will have to know your mother. They know you, so maybe your coworkers or neighbors will come. You'll remember forever that they showed you the respect and concern to support you at the time of your mother's death. So there would just be one brief example of how people will give you cues, and then you say, ooh, an opportunity to teach. And then you ask permission to teach. Always ask permission. Don't jump in and say, well, you know, if you don't have a visitation, you're not going to activate support. And 6 months later, somebody might see you but not even ask how you're doing since your mother died. Don't shame or blame or get defensive. People are doing the best they know to do.
And they're emotional. They're emotional.
Sure they are. So it's one of the most difficult times of their life. So they need you to gently but appropriately invite them to allow you the privilege of teaching them and then to honor the choices. I'd love it if every family I interacted with would say, oh yeah, I see value in all the elements.
Yeah.
That's probably not going to happen.
I read your book. I know exactly what to do.
Yeah. So, still, again, I keep going back to the theme of step into your gatekeeper role. But to do that, educate yourself, learn the art of supportive confrontation, not confrontation that creates defensiveness, but to know what an opportunity to try to help this family, to look at your own motivations for what it is you're doing. If you believe in the value of funerals, and by the way, ask yourself, do you? Because occasionally I'll meet somebody in funeral service who says, now when I die, I'm going to have a direct disposition. Well, we got a mismatch here. Do you believe in the value of a ceremony or do you not? Ask yourself that first and foremost. If you don't believe in it, what are you doing in it?
Well, in sales, we talk about a reframe, and that's a little bit what you're talking about is reframing, give an opportunity for another perspective. If you have their permission, there's some things you can do about the questions that you ask that shape the conversation to come, right? Because a lot of what you hear when a death occurs is, well, mom didn't want us to make a fuss, or what I guess some dads might say, bury me in the field in a gunny sack or what have you. But the funeral is for the living, right? It's not for the deceased. And so can you speak to that a little bit?
Well, yeah, I want to talk about your use of the word sales for a minute. Some people will say to me, oh, I don't want the family to feel like I'm selling them. And they'll get defensive with themselves about the fact they're actually teaching the value of the use of elements of ceremony.
Yeah.
So I want to reframe that a little bit to say,
Good.
I'm educating families about something I believe in the value of. And so sometimes I think we get a little ahead of ourselves with the use of that word selling, and then we get defensive with ourselves. I believe in the value of visitations and why we use music to help people move from head to heart, because we know attachment's anchored in your heart, not your head. So we use elements to help do that. So you're not selling, you're teaching, you're educating, and then you're honoring the choices that they make. Some people say everything is about sales. Well, in part I understand that intellectually, but ask yourself, in your context of what we call self as instrument, or your congruent self with what it is you're doing, if you believe in the value of meaningful funerals, reframe that a little bit for yourself and don't be defensive with yourself. Oh, I'm selling them? No, I'm educating them. And I'm giving them the opportunity to have a meaningful experience where they're probably going to affirm the value of that. And they're going to look and feel different after that experience than they felt before. So I don't know, Paul, you just really struck me with how we sometimes think, well, I can't teach them that. They'll think I'm selling them. No, you're educating them. You're educating
I agree with you. I do agree with you. But you said about the mindset and the belief. And so if you believe that when you sell that you are helping them and you're doing that with them and for them, as opposed to them, in other words, you're not manipulating them into something they don't want or need. It's a whole different experience.
Absolutely. Thank you for saying that.
Yeah.
You're not trying to force something. Remember, the third phase of providing families information and then educating them is anchored in honoring those choices, knowing they're not going to always carry out all the things you've educated them about. But if you're not doing that second piece of education, you're not stepping into your role today based on what we're faced with in funeral service.
Well, and I think an element, if I could add on, is just you care. You care enough to bring it up or to ask the difficult question or to go, quote unquote, there. If you didn't care, you wouldn't ask and you would just give them what they wanted at the cheapest price and be that efficient example that we talked about on the previous episode.
You made me think of three broad phases in helping families. Exploration leads to understanding, and that leads to action. So anchor in your heart and soul, viewers, that model. Exploration leads to an understanding, and out of the understanding comes action. If we too quickly try to move to action without building the relationship and looking at our whole intent of what it is we're doing to help the family, then we got that sequence out of order. So slow down. No families are going to come in often defensive. Watch out you don't get in the cycle of shared defensiveness with them, and know what a privilege it is to help them create a meaningful funeral experience.
Excellent. That's good stuff. Well, as we move to a wrap-up phase here, Dr. Wolfelt, what's one message that you wish every family or funeral professional could hear before they actually plan a service?
I think it all ties back again to understanding the why. And I often reflect, Paul, that you can't change the experience that somebody precious in your life has died. But when we learn the value of when somebody dies, that we gather together and we acknowledge the reality and recall the life and activate support and begin to express our grief into mourning and establish some sense of meaning in our continued living, what a privilege that is. So maybe I'd leave your viewers with a warning, a challenge, a reminder, and a hope. My warning would be, if you do this kind of caregiving, and it is caregiving, make sure you take good care of yourself. Too many people I find in funeral service are better at helping others than themselves. So whole separate topic is how do we create balance in our lives so we stay renewed, so we can be present to families and have what we call immediacy. So that's my warning. Take care of yourself. My challenge is to know that, yes, this is a challenging time of dangerous opportunity, but step up to that challenge. My reminder is, we as human beings, we have an amazing capacity to integrate loss into our lives, but a great way to start that process is to remember the words that I often speak, that when words are inadequate, you start with ceremony, because ceremony helps us know what to do when we don't know what to do. And my hope is you'll take something away from Paul and I's time together. And again, thank you, Paul, for hosting me and letting me share my passion for funeral service. My hope is you'll sit down with somebody who wasn't able to tune into this today and say, one of the things that Paul and Alan talked about today was, and you can fill in the blank, you can teach the functions of why. You can talk about how we interface elements of ceremony with that why. You can say simply, when words are inadequate, we must start with ceremony, not sit somebody in the chair and talk at them, but be present to them in ways that know that words are inadequate at times. But if we can create a meaningful ceremony, we get people off to a great start. Paul, thank you so much for reaching out to me and giving me an opportunity to touch some lives today. What a privilege.
Oh, you're so very welcome. It's been an honor to have you on, and thank you again for being with us and just for reminding us of how important our role is, for challenging us, and for equipping us to be better prepared for the future. So to all of our listeners, thank you for tuning in. Just remember, you can share feedback at the Director's Playbook at funeraldirectorslife.com. And if today's conversation gave you any new insight or inspiration, we'd love to know about that. And feel free to share that with your team or with your coworkers, your peers, or someone who needs to hear it. So until next time, thank you for joining us. Take care. Bye-bye.